Our industry, as much as people like us trying to optimize our own companies' activities, are limited in some of the aspects of our industry. We need governments to support. And another example, besides air traffic control, is sustainable aviation fuels and the decarbonization of the industries. There's things we can do, other members of Airlines for Europe do, other airlines around the world can do, but there are things we cannot do. And that's obvious that in our industry, and we are speaking on behalf of the industry today, no serious player denies the commitment of the industry to support the decarbonization of mobility in general, and in our specific case, to go down to zero carbon in 2050. But this requires huge investments way beyond what we can do financially, but also way beyond what any individual company can do, because it's infrastructure issues. We cannot build airports, and we cannot build factories for sustainable aviation fuels. And even if we could, we would only do that when there is incentives, which, for example, the US has been managing to do. The US, maybe a little later than Europe, but has surely discovered the potential of sustainable aviation fuels. And what do? They create tax advantages for producers and for buyers, airlines, to get incentivized to use these fuels and to bring up not just the use, but also bring up the production volumes of this very important part of decarbonizing our industry. And that's something we are missing in Europe. We're missing in Europe any support in this regard. We rather see blending mandates forcing us to buy non-existing volumes of sustainable aviation fuel at crazy prices, 5 times as much as fossil fuels, which obviously will not allow any of us to use more of that than what hopefully more and more passengers are willing to accept in terms of higher fares to compensate the airlines for it, because at least in our case, 30% of our costs are fuel, which maybe is a little less for a short-range airline, but for a long-range airline, that's probably a pretty good average around the world. How can you accept 5 times as high prices for fuel when 30% of your cost base is this single item? So we definitely have another issue besides air traffic control, where governments, airlines, our industry, other players in the industry, think about the engine manufacturers, but also society in general, need to show commitment that we have to make the right investments to scale up availability of synthetic aviation fuels and bring down the price disadvantage of these fuels quickly. And let's be honest, there is a global race on this already about where is investment going to build up volumes. And right now, while we speak, investments go towards the US, because they have, with their policies, created attractiveness, again, for investors to produce, but also for customers and airlines to use synthetic aviation fuels. And the, obviously, Inflation Reduction Act is, among other things, also focusing on this. And I think Europe has to be very careful. We lost the race for one sustainable industry when it comes to batteries. We lost the race when it comes to the sustainable ideas of solar panels. If we now also lose the global race for synthetic fuels, we don't only reduce our potential improvement on environmental topics, we prove once again that Europe is not competing where it should be with the engineers and the scientists we have on this continent who do know what needs to be done. So further measures to bring up sustainable aviation fuels, but also other ideas of decarbonization, hydrogen, electric propulsion for smaller airplanes, not the ones we use, but there's other parts of aviation. So I think it's time that we don't only talk about this and create, mandates, additional cost, but let's focus on the scaling and incentivizing of using these measures to decarbonize our industry. And that, I think, is, again, something where what always strikes me, between the positive attitude towards aviation when it comes to the individual consumer, which of course also everybody in this city to a certain degree is, and then when it comes to policy making towards aviation, we see a huge gap. So I think our job, partly also the job for Airlines for Europe, is to close that gap and turn some of the positive energy we see in our customers. This summer, we basically see more customers than we can fly almost. Let's turn that energy which exists among the voters and people in Europe towards policies which help us to stay in the race, not just for competitiveness in financial terms, but also in competitiveness for reducing the environmental impact of our industry, which totals up to 2.8%, as we all know, of carbonization around the world. And that, I think, is a very important topic, not the only one, again, which cannot be done alone, where we need politics and the industry to work together. Thank you.
Well done.
Right, thank you very much. And following on from that as well, I'm going to pick up actually points that already been raised by Michael and by Carsten. And